Good afternoon, everyone. Well, we're going to have a very, very fast run through engines and their value concept. And I think we all kind of have the concept that for a new aircraft, the engine probably contributes around 25% of the total value of the aircraft. However, as an aircraft ages, that value proposition of the engines can be up to 90% of the value of the aircraft, because they retain the value and the airframe doesn't necessarily retain the same value. And so there's this dynamic that is occurring where, in general terms, the difference between an aircraft that has an engine program and an aircraft that doesn't have an engine program, there's a way to work out what that difference in value is based on the value of the program. And the programs are very important because they give the operator and the purchaser the capacity to understand shop visit availability, there's proactive services available, and there's also a surety about the cash flow with the engine maintenance liabilities, and also peace of mind. So there's quite a high value composition between cost and value. So now we're going to talk about the value of engines today. And I guess I want to start with the panelists. So the panelists here today, marvelous. We've come through the global pandemic and the madness that was after the global pandemic with prices of aircraft and values. Do you think that the engine market would be called normalized now since then, or is there still some movement going on? Anyone can go first. How about you, Zach?
I think that there's a lot of, well, first of all, supply chain is affecting a lot of things right now. So, post-COVID, we definitely have seen a lot of parts, critical parts that are needed to clear engines out of the shop that are hard to come by right now. So that's causing downtime extensions. A lot of turnaround times for the engines and whip are not moving very quickly. We are seeing a little bit of freedom in 2024. Has it normalized? I would say not really just yet, but we're hopeful that things are getting better in 2025, in my opinion.
But we're over the hill?
I would cautiously say yes.
Okay.
I'd say no. I don't think we're over the hill at all. I mean, the supply chain issues. I mean, if we take Trump at his word, maybe he ends the war in the Ukraine, and then all of a sudden there's the availability of a whole bunch of engines that would have to go into the shop. I mean, I think the industry is at full capacity, and getting in to have an engine overhauled is difficult. There are a lot of planes on the ground and the like. So. I'm not as optimistic as Zach.
Okay. How about you, James?
Yeah, I would say, excuse me, the Rolls-Royce experience is normalized. We haven't experienced this. Yes, we see supply chain issues, to be fair. We really do, but we've been able to mitigate. We're getting consistent turn times through the shop. We don't have people waiting around on lease engines. We have lease engines available. So I think in our market segment, we're robust.
Okay. All right. Sebastian?
I think it's a bit different for us, maybe. I'm more on the side with Richard. I think we still have some runway in front of us before we get out. We have a large fleet installed base. I mean, more than almost 70,000 engines. So the turnaround time is still long. I'll piggyback on what Jay mentioned yesterday. So we kind of forgot what was normality 5 years ago.
Okay.
I'll do a little spin to this. I think the new normality is not going to be 2019, 2018. Okay. We're going to live in a VUCA environment, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, with all the geopolitical issues that can hit us. I think that we have to find a new normal that everybody will be comfortable to operate with. I think the paradigm are actually changing.
So we have to recalibrate what normal means.
I think so too.
Okay. How about you, Greg?
I think there are challenges out there, obviously, but I think we're managing those fairly efficiently. So I think it's going to continue to improve into next year. And I think you're right, though. The new normal is going to be very challenging.
So in the last few years, this is kind of a little bit around the normalization concept. In the last few years, we've had some considerable escalations in annual rates and annual costs and overhaul costs and shop visits. Everyone's nodding, so that's good. That's good. We're okay. So a lot of the talk we hear about that is about labor rates and about raw material costs. Do you think we've reached a level of stability with that, or is there still some, let's call it, runway to go?
I think we've reached probably the peak for that. I mean, the interest rates are coming down. The
Okay.
Fed is cutting their interest rate. I think the inflation seems to be under control. We may be lagging a little bit behind the consumer market, but we're not a consumer product. So there's some differences. Raw material is still precious. It's hard to find. To qualify a supplier, it takes a lot of investment, takes time. So, but I think we're over the hump on that front, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that and echo that statement for sure.
Yeah, agree.
Okay, so what we're saying is that next year, the costs of a shop visit are going to go down?
Not down,
No, see, I knew there was something.
but
Dave's a comedian.
Normalized, Dave, normalized.
Normalize, okay.
You know, I think we're out of hyperinflation right now. I mean, I think we saw a very inflationary period last year that was hard to bear for everyone.
Okay.
I think it's starting to normalize, as the term is apparently being coined up here. I think we definitely are seeing a little bit more normalization in the cost of the materials that we get. We got hit with a lot of additional, I want to say, fees, charges, and increases from a lot of suppliers due to sourcing of raw materials, which a lot of the critical parts that we kind of were discussing here, or that I was mentioning, we have a few critical parts that are definitely holding engines and whip. And that's due to sourcing the raw materials that we are having trouble getting. And therefore, supply and demand rules, you have, this part, you need the materials to make it, it's going to be more expensive.
Okay,
we're in a business that is low volume, high complexity, very sophisticated, and very high requirements.
yeah,
To qualify the supplier, it's very difficult, and we're often in a sole source. It's difficult. What we do as an engine or aircraft, it's a complex thing to do.
Yeah.
And we're in the low volumes. We're nowhere near the car industry. I mean, everybody that knows me knows that I'm a Porsche enthusiast.
Really?
They build about 1,000 cars a day, Every hour, it's 50 cars. We build about like 6 engines a day. We're nowhere near that industry.
Yeah.
So it's complex what we do.
yeah, okay. So talking, before we go and speak about the actual perception of value and what happens between cost and value, there's been some studies that we know of talking about the difference between the value of an aircraft with engines that are on program and a value of an aircraft that is not on program. Is there anything that you guys as the OEMs are seeing, before we get Richard involved from the value perspective, that you guys are seeing in terms of studies that talk about the difference between on and not on programs?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. So there was a recent study by Don Spieth and his crew at Van Gas that shows a midlife engine that's on an OEM program sees an 8 to 9% residual value improvement over an asset that is not on an OEM program. And that's a pretty significant value. And so I think as we're seeing that through these appraisal cycles, I think there's some opportunities there.
I'll come back to something that was said yesterday. I think it's all in our mind. Mr. Ricky, very interesting talk. Listen, if you own an airplane today, a business jet, in my humble opinion, if you're not having your engine on an OEM program, you gotta be nuts. You have to be crazy not to do so.
He said that.
Yeah, he said the opposite. And to prove my points, and I really respect his opinion, I check his net worth, it's 300 times mine, so he's clearly a good businessman, much better than I am, but the data is on my favor though. Like I said, we have 70,000 engines in service. Out of those, 16,000 are purely turbofan, business jet, so from GT15D to 800, half of them are on a program, ESP program. And if you go down one level, the 800, so our most newest center line, you're talking about 80%. The 300, a mature product, that's north of 70% enrollment. Phantom 300 or PC12, that's our like very mixed of ownership, you're in the 65%. There's value in it. It's not just anymore the residual value impact, it's all the service that we bring, the proactive services that are all exclusive to us. We have engineers that do equation, algorithm, that can predict and do some preventive maintenance. This is where the value is. And all those customers cannot be wrong, in my opinion. And that's why there's great value to be on an OEM engine program.
Yeah, so obviously we all have been talking and thinking about that comment. And I have run into so many situations where customers try to do it on their own without being on an engine program, whether it's OEM or otherwise. And I have personally saved a couple owners out of some very sticky situations because they tried to go about it on their own. They bought a set of engines from somewhere else in the world. They put them in their hangar, waited to put them on pylon whenever they needed an event, and said, I'm not going to do the engine program. Well, lo and behold, they go to hang those engines. They're big paperweights at that point because somebody had screwed up along the way and they didn't catch it. So, you know, if you are going about it on your own, you're not on an OEM program or otherwise, you really are putting yourself up for a lot of exposure. This was an older aircraft, and that conversation is very pertinent in this discussion. Your engine costs versus aircraft values, this is going to be a very big determinant on what kind of aircrafts you're talking about. If we're talking about a legacy aircraft that's aging, yeah, you might not want to be on a program, or it might be the only thing that keeps it flying. But in this particular case, this customer ended up, or this owner ended up with a $500,000 bill before he could hang those engines on the pylon, and we had to end up coming and helping and participating in that event. He re-enrolled in MSP. So I think that there's a conversation on both sides of the fence, but the majority is kind of speaking where, you know, our capture rates are in the 70 and 80%, some models higher, and people are just want to pay the rate and move on and enjoy their aircraft.
I'd like to share a story, if I could, that exemplifies this. It jumps on what Sebastian talked about with us, with the data, right, and the expertise that we have. So customer on the West Coast makes their flight, lands, everybody goes home, all's dark, all's quiet. EHM auto uploads overnight. The desk in Germany gets a warning from our algorithms overnight. So at 7 a.m. in Germany, we see that there was a surge in the engine in flight. Still within specs, so there's no lights on in the cockpit. Everything's good. Everybody's happy. The engine did what it was built to do, right? Brought everybody home safely. So by 7 a.m., the technician, the engineer, gets a warning indication, hey, something happened with this engine. So we do a quick huddle up. We say, you know, we need to notify the customer. We need to go take a look at that engine. By the time the customer gets into the office, we're on the phone with the DOM saying, something happened with your engine overnight. We'd like to come take a look. Is that all right? By noon, we have people on site. By 5 p.m., we have borescope photos showing what happened inside the engine. It needs to come to the shop. Within 7 days, we've got a lease engine installed there, back up and flying. All of the cost, all of the logistics, everything is managed through corporate care. There's no additional cost here. There's no logistics nightmare for the DOM. We're managing all of that. You can't do that without the data and the experience that we have as the OEM.
The data is probably one of the key aspects that I just want to touch on quickly. The amount of data that comes off the newer generation engines, I mean, we're talking thousands of parameters that come off during flight, and even more that come off when it's in the hangar. And the value that the OEM teams can bring to analyze that data, interject themselves into it with the mobile teams to go out with material, with the crews, to get out there and fix a problem is unheard of. In the past, we'd be dealing with an engine that would tell you it broke when something came out the back, right? That's not the case anymore with today's new generation engines.
Yeah, and I think that all of us up here on stage have a connected engine solution that's you know, we just launched ours this month at base. You know, the algorithms that James mentioned, I mean, our trend data is run through all the algorithms, and as soon as a trend alert occurs, the operator's notified immediately, and then we take action. When one of those events occurs, you probably want to be on a program at that point, just saying.
Okay, we're all drinking the drink that says we've got to be on the programs. We get that.
All right, bravo. Good job.
It's got great value. We know that. But there are some questions.
Yeah, Richard's quiet.
So if we talk about engines that are on versus engines that are not on program, and there's a differential in the value that is historically related to the buy-in price and the cost of being on the program. We're seeing in the last couple of years, there's some variation in that. And sometimes the variation is to do with the age of the aircraft. Sometimes it's to do with whether it's a hard time or an on-condition aircraft engine. But the disparity has become quite apparent in some aircraft. And I was thinking about it while we were considering what we were going to talk about, and I think there's examples from each of your brands that has that issue. And I guess, Rick, if there's something we could talk about there with respect to values, are you seeing it from a valuation variation with certain types of aircraft or certain types of scenarios?
Well, I think each of the engine groups, first of all, in recent years, this year I'll go to 6 or 8, the engine OEMs will hold briefings, both on the commercial and corporate side. And so you'll make great inroads into asking the question or who to ask the question of, and it'll certainly help in the valuation process. And so I was having a conversation at lunch, and one of the OEMs, they actually have 3 levels, or they have 3 different levels. And so as an appraiser, you got to consider all those items. I did think that Al would probably cancel our session after Ken said no need to be on an engine program, and I was paying a lot of attention to forks, the value of forks and the like. But in answering the engine question, I think if there's somebody's buying a plane and you're matching a purchase and sale and a pre-buy, I think you've got to ask, when's the effective date? When are things going to change? And then as an appraiser, you've got to look at, let's say it's a JSSI. Well, there's various levels of those contracts. So you've got to look at the impact. You've got to look at what work has been done on those engines alike to come up with a value.
Okay. So as OEMs, how are you guys looking at the difference between, say, a current engine and a legacy engine? Because I think it's the legacy engines where we see that disparity, that the buy-in cost is so high, or the conversion cost is so high, or the shop visit cost is so high. Is it a question about, whether it's beyond economic repair? Is it about what the market strength is for that engine type? Like, what is it that's causing that from your perspective as OEMs?
I'm happy to take this. So we see a lot of our older aircraft, the TFE Classic fleet primarily, where my teammate and I will put out a quote, and a lot of times we won't even put the quote out to the customer because we know it's worth more than the airplane. And so you really run into a weird situation where you've got an airplane that's worth less than what the engine costs are going to be in the future. I think you have a disparity between, obviously it depends on what type of aircraft, 10 to 20 years, 5 to 10, 0 to 5. That all has a bearing on how many hours are on the engines, where are they to event, how far are they from event. For an example, like say somebody buys an aircraft that's just fresh out of overhaul, and then they take it off the program, and they go out there and list it. Well, it's a fresh set of engines, so you think, oh, well, I've got plenty of time. Then it goes into maybe a 135 situation where it's flying constantly, and then all of a sudden they run up on the overhaul. Well, maybe during that time they did an interior refurb, they did a Wi-Fi installation, they maybe did some avionics modifications and things like that. So that would bolster the value, in my opinion. I'm not an appraiser, but in my opinion, that would help increase the value of the aircraft, but you're still going to have that engine cost there as well. So in my opinion, that's kind of the reason why, it used to be buy-in was dollar for dollar. That's going to increase the value from an engine program perspective. I've still heard that from some people, and then other people have a different perspective on it. And I think it's a matter of what airplane you're talking about.
Okay.
Said it all.
Y'all don't have anything to add? Come on.
I'll jump in. That's all right. Yeah. During COVID, there was a certain part of the fleet, legacy fleet, that I thought would attrite, right? As we saw in previous big events that happen around the globe. But it didn't happen that way. In fact, the older platforms got new life breathed into them through new charter companies or whatever, right? And so now there's engine support needed. Now, I think the equation that you're talking about, Dave, is where maybe it's upside down. The engines are worth more than the whole value of the aircraft, right? So we have been working on innovative ideas on how do we support those maturing aircraft, right? Because the engines are going to last another 10, 15 years. They are, but they're going to need service and support. And at what price point, and at what types of service and level of service. So, these programs anymore are not just about shop visit accrual, are they?
No.
We all talked about service, right? Every one of us has talked about service. We recognize that we can't just rest back on a shop visit accrual. That's not enough. We have to differentiate through offering exceptional levels of service, which is what we're focused on. And I think we have to do that with the legacy aircraft as well as with the new product. Okay. I think a lot of the customer sentiment is maybe the OEMs are too focused on the new and shiny stuff and they're not worried about legacy. I would say that's not true in what I see in my colleagues here in the engine industry.
Yeah. So if it's about monitoring and the health of the engine and all those thousands of parameters, and you've got a view on the health of the engines, you're providing service to your customers. You're not just providing a shop visit or an engine, you're providing service. How are you, there's new brokers, there's new buyers, there's new people in the marketplace. How are you guys helping them to be educated and communicated with to understand that you are providing more than just a shop visit or a service?
No.
Oh, yeah, I'll take this one. It's a very good question. As a matter of fact, we kind of realized that there's a lot of education that needs to be done. COVID was really the perfect storm. Nobody's going to debate that. The paradigm has completely changed, and we have to go back. And I think it's a bit of our fault that we didn't disclose any information. We were very prudent with what we had. And I think now it's time to be a little bit more open and talk about the value prop, talk about the rates, talk about what's the cost of an overall. On the PT6, the price have went up drastically, and we have to almost re-educate the whole ecosystem with that information. So I have in my team one person that is actually here, Sajad. His mandate in 2025 is to create a package that we will issue on a yearly basis to all the appraisers, the banks, the financiers, that will give them information that they're looking for. Because I think we're going to have a challenge in years to come that of scalability, because the fleet is growing, there's more and more people coming in, and we cannot build anymore this relationship of I know you, you know me, call me, I'll give you the info. That's not sustainable. So we have to have that kind of package to educate the whole industry that is needed this information, because it's just essential. It creates false perception, and we're just self-inflicting some wounds to ourselves by doing the way we've done it.
And I'd say that events like this, other forums where we can speak in front of everybody, puts names and faces together, ask us questions, especially off to the side, more than willing to talk to you in the hallways, dinner, whenever, right? Just come talk to us. We're happy to help.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So James and I sit on the NBAA Maintenance Committee. We do a lot of outreach throughout the year with the committee. In addition to that, I do a podcast here and there. I just did one recently about engine programs. So feel free to check that out on LinkedIn if you want to actually hear my take on engine programs. These kind of opportunities for us to get up and speak and educate, the broader audience is really kind of, I think you're going to see more of that in the near future. I know maintenance conference coming up in 2025 will be another opportunity for us to do so. But as Greg said, pull us aside, ask us questions. I mean, we're not going to get to all the Slido questions here. There's already a ton on there. So catch me outside the door and, I don't want to fight, but let's talk. I mean, that's what we're here for. That's what we do. We live it, breathe it every day, and we're passionate about it. We'd love to talk to you.
I applaud the free flow of information. I think as appraisers, if you have perfect information, you can sort of come up with perfect answers. So I applaud all that. Zach tells me he answers his phone 24 hours a day. I got 6 burner phones. He does answer his phone.
I got to start screening that a little better for you, Richard.
So when we were preparing for this session, we anticipated absolutely no questions about loaner engines, and already there's 17. So it's clearly on the minds of those that we are speaking with. Let's talk about loaner engines.
I'll go.
Of course.
We have loaner engines available. Did I mention that? I might have mentioned the Rolls-Royce has loaner engines available. We are constantly, consistently reanalyzing and reinvesting back into our support network. So that's spares availability, that's service network, that's loaner engines. We're constantly looking at our reliability rate. We are hyper-focused on the aircraft availability and maximizing the uptime on the aircraft. Because, we get a black eye every time one goes down, right? So it's in our own best interest, it's self-preservation as well as it's investment back in our customers who are paying for the program.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to go ahead and speak. So Honeywell's been getting beaten over the head for this has been the bane of my existence for the last few years. I'm happy to report that we recapitalized our engine bank, and we are flowing engines in the shop a lot better. To corroborate what I was saying about our supply chain improvements, we currently have most models in stock in the rental bank report. I looked at it this morning, yesterday. There's a few engine models that we are critical on, but we have definitely made a serious effort to recapitalize the bank and provide better service to our customers. So we are actively monitoring that.
Okay. So 2 have got engines.
We have engines available. We have to manage through them, but yes, they're available.
Well, we do and we don't, in a way. We're supporting like 125 different platforms.
How many?
125.
I think that's a lot.
It's a lot. So there are some platforms that are more tricky than others, especially in the older ones. I think the magic sauce that we had before COVID has changed. Longer turnaround time in the shop created more demand, and it's kind of a vicious circle that is hard to get out of it. That's why I'm a bit more prudent on this recovery, that I think we still have some runway in front of us. But it's not lacking of effort on our side or investment. There's nothing more that we would like to produce enough. But at some point also, it needs to be economically viable. And some of those platforms are just like a 306B. There's only 22 airplanes, 328 Dornier, there's only 22 left. So it's hard to support that kind of fleet.
That question.
So there's a question here. There's 2 aircraft that need the same component. One's aircraft on ground, but not on a program. The other's not AOG, but is on a program. Is there an official view as to who gets the part?
So I'm going to go ahead and take this one first. So yeah, parts is one thing. I would actually speak to rental engines first on this. When it comes to a rental engine, the answer is absolutely. If it's on program, it's going to have priority. We will prioritize our customers that prepay for their maintenance for a rental engine every single time. In our minds, those customers are the best customers we have at Honeywell. And so, from a single part perspective, what I've been told is that it's a first come, first served basis. However, we do prioritize rental engines. I'll leave it there.
We prioritize by out date, by next flight date. At the same time, I like to say membership has privileges.
Okay. Yep. Want to leave it there?
Well, on our side, when you're on ESP, you have like customer manager that are looking at it so they can quickly react. Do they get priority? They know their way around to create miracles. So that's probably my answer for this question.
Okay. There was a question on there, and it's like when you're at the traffic lights trying to cross the road and you just keep pushing the button. There was a question on there with 11 people that have pushed the button. OEMs have increased catalog list prices at 8% plus yearly. If this trend continues, engine costs will double in the next 7 years. How is this sustainable for owners? Your microphones are
You're
on.
welcome to. I mean,
You're always first, Zach. So.
Oh, you want me to speak? Okay, so apparently it's just me up here. So if we're talking about catalog list prices of the parts catalog itself or the hourly rates, I'll just address both of them. So if you're on a program, you're locking in a rate for whatever term you've signed. So MSP is a 5-year term, right? You're locking in that base rate for the next 5 years with, we hope minimal escalation due to inflation, which ours is based on material and labor indices. So if you're talking about the parts catalog and the list prices there and they increase, then being on a program protects you from that increase. Is it sustainable for owners? I think it depends on which platform you're talking about. If we're talking about a Lear 35 or a Westwind 1124, I mean, when you're looking at the value of the aircraft versus how much you're going to pay in maintenance and parts, that might be a losing proposition, and that might be why we see a lot of end-of-life scenarios and airplanes get knocked in the head. You're talking about a newer aircraft or in the middle. I mean, I get the point here, but I think this further suggests that an engine program is probably going to be a better deal for you. You can lock in the rate.
Similarly, we're based on the U.S. labor and material indices, right? That's what it is. So our costs are going up as well. We're not passing all of those along to the operator, but much of that has to be shared. We are seeing our margins erode as well as others, right? I think we've heard it from other businesses around the industry.
And I think, like I mentioned, I think we are towards the end of that hump. Knock on wood, no extra wars or no viruses. I think we could be safe that the economy is landing softly. So I think that we are behind those hyperinflation rate in the industry because, like you're saying, it also impacts us. We didn't do a flow through. We got hit really hard on titanium cost. So.
Our customers really griped about this quite a bit. We had a couple of years that were higher than our typical. And so we have come up with a solution, and that's a fixed escalation rate. And so we're offering that now, and we're having a good uptake in the marketplace. Some say no, others are absolutely on board with it. And so we're innovating. We're trying to shift with the times, right? We see the times shifting, we see the fleet aging, and we're adding new product to the fleet every week. How do we keep up with both ends of that spectrum? Innovation, innovative ideas.
Okay. So in as much as 11 people pushed the button about the loaner engines, and we answered the question because you've all got loaner engines. There's another one where 20 people have pushed the button and said, what do you say to the owners that pay for these programs but are now grounded due to the shortage of loaner engines?
Me again. Yeah, okay. It's been, like I said, it's been the bane of my existence for the last 3 years. And in fact, you guys have probably seen me walking in and out of this show all morning. Dealing with a loaner engine where we were trying to dispatch one out to a G280, who will be enrolling in MSP, by the way. That is one of those things where the last few years have been terrible. I think that we have now gotten to a point of partial recovery, and it is an unfortunate situation. We have had this come up many times. Hey, I'm paying for this. I'm at my CJI. I'm due a loaner engine, and we do every possible effort to provide that engine to them. As soon as one comes available or comes off wing, we dispatch it out immediately. Now, it's a cascade effect, though. If the supply chain is hurting and engines are in WIP and not moving, that cascades down to everybody. If rental engines are on pylon longer, somebody else is going to be short an engine and they're not going to get it for their event. So we have a 100-hour, 200-hour overfly, depending on which event you're talking about. For the CZI, we have the overfly, which gives them a little bit more time. But we do everything we can to supply rentals. It's been a tough couple of years, though.
And I think it's this type of transparency and absolutely wanting to answer the question that is helpful to us as a business jet community. Because in historic terms, it's been, there's no problem. But I think if we acknowledge that there is an issue and say we're working through it to a point where we're actually working through it rather than just rhetoric,
I've been on the other side of the table as a DOM, so I get it. Like, it's a terrible deal. Go ahead, Sebastian.
No, I mean, we all understand the issues, and we're all acting on it. If you fast forward in 10 years from now, this is why I think the newer generation of engines that transmit data will really help us out to plan better the events, schedule things, and hence why it's even more important for the future to be on those programs, because this is where we're going to be able to act on it. Because I still think that we're going to have a lack of technicians. It's always going to be tight on that front, and turnaround time is never going to be back to 60 days.
Yeah.
So planning.
Yeah. So there's a question there that talks about that an OEM program changes the value of an aircraft over the other engine program services. I'm not sure what that means, but is it talking about, does your program increase value of the aircraft?
Yes, and versus a third party.
Oh,
Versus a
that's what it's
third-party
asking,
program.
yeah.
And I will say yes, because we have business aviation dedicated resources, and we are the only ones that have nearly 7 decades of expertise on our engines.
Okay.
And we are the only ones that has lease engines for our product lines, right? You're just not going to find them out there very often. Now, in an emerging market of legacy product, yes, there are more and more going out, but we are also in the business of buying up serviceable used engines, right? Because we see the need to support those maturing aircraft. So is there value with the OEM? Yes, I would say it's primarily in priority resources dedicated to your platform and in that expertise that comes only with experience and years of doing it.
Rick, how about your view as the appraiser in the panel?
From an appraiser viewpoint, if it's on an engine program, an OEM engine program, I think the appraiser's job is much easier. The value to those programs is well known industry-wise. They all have different degrees or different separations in the programs and the like, but there's real value there. Again, I think it's important that you kind of have what's the effective date of the appraisal? Has the work been completed? Is the plane ready to go? And I think that's all quite important in the process. But yeah, tremendous value.
Okay. So as we get towards the end of our session, regarding emerging markets like Brazil, are you guys playing there? Are you finding that you have an opinion about what that looks like?
Com certeza, eu gosto muito do Brasil. Brasileira também. Well, yes, I do speak Portuguese, but it's a very good question. Actually, when I started in the ESP not long, 5 years ago, I've identified Brazil as great potential as an emerging. As a matter of fact, we've hired one lady that is actually taking care of that region, solely focused on the Brazilian market, and we have seen some great results out of there. But it's a very complex country with import and import taxes, so there's some challenges there. But the reason that we have a conference now at CJI, I mean, prove great success, and we're going to be there again next year.
Yeah.
Well, Zach, you'd like to go first?
I know, I've been talking a lot. You go ahead.
We are watching this space for sure. Every one of the airframe OEMs is talking to us about support in Brazil right now. I think we heard earlier today a little bit about Asia and how there's a lot of demand but not a lot of infrastructure. And I think we're all going to need to build that as it grows. But we're watching that demand signal very closely. We're finding out how we're allocating resources for how we can get there quickly to support from wherever we are versus basing resources down there immediately. So we're watching that space very closely.
Yep, so Danny was on the panel at CJI Brazil earlier this year, my teammate, and she does MSP, avionics, and engines. Very proud to have her on there, and she's having a lot of activity in Brazil right now. We've been kind of working together on getting a lot of quotes out there to people and kind of getting the word about the programs a little more spread in the country.
So as an industry, is our takeaway from the engine OEMs that we can look forward to engine monitoring, labor increases in fleet management, and communication with us as an industry?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, this
We're
morning,
excited. Isn't this good?
this morning, Michael led us off with talking about predictive analytics, and I think we're all headed there, right? We've all talked about our connected engines now, and we're all looking at a day where there is no more in-flight disruption because we can see a component failure even before it happens. We can see an impending problem, and we will notify the operator. So I think we're seeing a future much brighter than today.
Just a word of caution, and the attorneys mentioned it earlier, but I think over the next 3 years, and I already see it in some work that I'm doing, but there's a certain amount of fraud out there, and we have to be very vigilant, not so much from the OEMs, but some of these parts, the stuff going on. If the war ends in Russia, you got 700 planes, those engines will come back in, and those parts, so we have to be very vigilant and careful there.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. We just saw a case like this, so I'm just going to say buyer beware. Talk to your OEM, vet things. Fortunately, the buyer did come to us and say, something about the documentation looks fishy. Can you help me out? And sure enough, they were falsified documents.
It looks like there's quite a few more questions, and we're out of time, unfortunately. Let's thank the panel profusely, and if you have more questions, these guys are around for the next couple of days in the room. Thank you very much.